Everyone's asking the same thing right now. Is the US economy about to snap? Headlines are flashing warnings, markets feel uneasy, and it's not just everyday investors who are anxious. The warnings are now coming from the very top. This breakdown isn't just about bad luck or market cycles. It's about something deeper. 4 major cracks forming all at once. And they all trace back to one urgent message from JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon. He says, we're on the verge of losing our economic dominance, and if we don't get our act together fast, we won't even remain the world's reserve currency. Trump isn't calling it a collapse, but if you look closely at his strategy, it's designed to ride the chaos. So, is this unfiltered concern just policy fatigue, or a code for what Trump may be engineering? A calculated crash? Buffett? He's sitting on mountains of cash and doubling down on defense, and Dimon just laid out the reasons why, in plain sight. Today, I'm going to break down the 4 warning signs that he laid out on stage, each one pointing to a system built to collapse. You'll hear his words directly. We've got the clips, the data, and the political playbook that connects it all, because once you understand what's really happening behind the headlines, you'll see why this might be the final warning before the next big crash. The only question left is, are you ready? Let's start with what Jamie Dimon sees as the most immediate and dangerous risk: global instability.
Look, the way I look at it, the big picture is the tectonic plates are shifting. We got to get our heads wrapped around that. Those tectonic plates are the geopolitics with these terrible wars, terrible proxy terrorist activity around the world, North Korea, the potential proliferation of nuclear weapons over time, which is the greatest threat to mankind. And then you have the other tectonic shift is the global economy.
In his words, the tectonic plates are shifting, and it's not just metaphorical. We're talking about actual wars, nuclear threats, and a breakdown of decades-long military alliances. From Ukraine to Gaza, from North Korea to the South China Sea, the global map is heating up, and Dimon's calling it a seismic threat to financial systems. Dimon connects this instability to America's waning global influence. He warns that if our military commitments falter, the world will seek other options. And in global politics, that often means one thing: nuclear weapons. That's not speculation, it's history. When trust in power structures fails, deterrence shifts toward extremes. Now think about this. Trump has made it clear he's ready to pull back from NATO. He's told allies to pay more or risk losing American protection. That might sound like tough negotiating, but Dimon says if the world can't rely on the US military umbrella, nations will start seeking nuclear alternatives. Let that sink in. A collapse of trust in American leadership could trigger an arms race. More on that later. And it won't stop with governments. Markets react to uncertainty with one move: sell. Investors don't wait to see how geopolitical tension plays out. They exit. And that's when the panic sets in. Dimon sees the stakes even clearly. He points out that American leadership isn't just military, it's economic. Trade deals, investment partnerships, and financial cooperation are just as crucial to stability. If we lose leadership in both, we don't just risk isolation, we risk collapse. This factor, this global realignment, isn't distant. It's already happening. As the US steps back, Russia pushes forward, China fortifies, the Middle East simmers, and old alliances begin to stretch, weaken, or snap entirely. So when Dimon says the tectonic plates are moving, he's not just warning about headlines. He's talking about a foundational threat to global order and capital flow. And when that order cracks, markets don't just correct, they convulse. And this is just the beginning. The second major factor is one Dimon calls out with absolute certainty: the bond market is going to crack.
Yeah. You know, these are very large numbers. You've seen it a little bit. You know, you had the crack in the bond market in COVID a little bit. You know, the government did the right stuff, then they massively overdid both spending and QE. We borrowed and spent $10 trillion from 2020 to today. Okay, and you heard the numbers before. We also bought $4 trillion of your securities, on top of the $4 trillion we bought in the first go-round. Those numbers are true globally, not quite as big as ours, but the QE of us was $8 trillion, the QE of the rest of the world was another $8 trillion or something like that. You're talking about huge sums of money, and we don't really know the full effect of that. And you know, the bond dealers, which Gary mentioned, you know, inventories are much smaller than they used to be, partially because of rules and regulations. And you are going to see a crack in the bond market, okay? It is going to happen.
Now, that's a statement. And it's coming from the head of the largest bank in America. Let's talk numbers. The US has added over $10 trillion in debt in just 5 years. We've crossed 100% debt to GDP. Diamond warns that if we hit a recession, that deficit could skyrocket from 7% to 10% of GDP. That's unsustainable. But here's the kicker. It's not just the debt. It's the structure of the financial system that's fragile. Diamond says we've flooded the system with $10 trillion of borrowed cash and bought up trillions in securities. That's trillions more on top of the previous wave of quantitative easing. This flood has distorted asset prices across the board. Real estate, stocks, even speculative investments, all artificially inflated by easy money. Now, that money is drying up, and we're left with inflated assets and no cushion. Diamond warns that dealer inventories, the big institutions that provide liquidity in the bond market, are now far too thin. The bond market, he says, will break. It's just a matter of time. And let's not forget, the bond market isn't just any market. It's the backbone of global finance. When U.S. Treasury bonds become volatile, everything from pension funds to mortgage rates starts shaking, because these bonds are supposed to be the safest asset in the world. Diamond points to a hidden danger here, the liquidity trap. Dealers can't move the volume they used to. Stricter regulations post-2008 have made them risk-averse. That sounds good until you realize it means they can't respond when panic hits. So when everyone rushes to sell, there's no one on the other side. That's what creates the crack. Trump, ever the tactician, may be looking at this chaos as leverage. If markets crack and rates fall, he gains political capital. He can argue that his economic plans, tax cuts, deregulation, spending are needed to revive growth. It's a dangerous game, but one he's played before. During his term, Trump not only pressured the Fed to keep rates low, but signed off on policies that artificially propped up markets while pushing debt levels to historic highs. These moves helped distort the bond market, setting the stage for the very crack Diamond says is now inevitable. Meanwhile, Buffett's actions speak louder than words. His record-setting cash reserves suggest he sees a correction coming, and not a mild one. He's pulled back from buying, trimmed positions, and is sitting on the sidelines. And it's a signal. Diamond also highlights how asset prices are still elevated, despite all this looming risk. He calls it a consequence of too much money chasing too few assets. And when reality hits, those prices won't correct. They'll collapse. And here's the human cost. When credit tightens, regular people get hit first. Higher mortgage rates, frozen business loans, job cuts. It's not theoretical. It's systemic. And it starts with that crack Diamond is warning about. Factor 3, the enemy within.
And then the biggest one, underlying both that, is the enemy within. I'm not as worried about China. China is a potential adversary. They're doing a lot of things well. They have a lot of problems. What I really worry about is us.
This might be the most chilling warning yet. Not about war or the economy, but about us. According to Jamie Dimon, the biggest threat to America isn't China, inflation, or even the bond market. It's something much closer, our own dysfunction. He calls it the enemy within. And when you hear what he means, it hits hard. Dimon says the U.S. is suffering from an extraordinary level of mismanagement by cities, states, and institutions. We're not functioning like a team anymore. We don't collaborate. We don't even talk to each other. And the result? A nation paralyzed by division, bureaucracy, and gridlock.
The amount of mismanagement is extraordinary. By state, by city, for pensions, and that stuff is going to kill us.
From failing inner-city schools and broken healthcare to over-regulation and outdated infrastructure, the cracks are everywhere. We have the resources, we have the innovation, but we've lost the will to act. And that, Dimon says, is killing us. He blasts both political sides. Over-regulation disguised as virtue. Red tape that stalls progress. Dimon calls the government a leviathan, too weak to solve problems, yet too strong in enforcing rules that choke productivity. Economically, this means stagnation. Dimon believes we could be growing at 3% per year, enough to solve most of our financial issues. But that requires reform, fixing permitting, modernizing education, and creating smarter tax policies. Otherwise, we risk becoming a country that's rich in ideas but poor in execution. Buffett has pointed to inefficiencies, red tape, and institutional gridlock as long-term drags on American competitiveness. And even though he stays politically neutral, his portfolio shifts, like holding unprecedented cash, often speak louder than words. This is also where Trump's messaging converges with Dimon's analysis. Drain the swamp wasn't just campaign rhetoric. Trump's push to reduce regulation, restructure federal departments, and renegotiate trade deals was aimed at precisely this Leviathan. While his methods may differ, the diagnosis overlaps. Trump's systematic dismantling of institutional norms, from attacks on the Fed to hollowing out regulatory bodies, contributed to the internal dysfunction Diamond describes. They were strategic choices that weakened the system from within.
And, I always get asked this question, are we going to be the reserve currency? And no. If we are not the preeminent military and the preeminent economy in 40 years, we will not be the reserve currency. That's a fact. Just read history. Now, I think we will be. Warren Buffett here would tell you we're enormously resilient. I agree with that. I think this time is different. This time we have to get our act together, and we have to do it very quickly.
The deeper concern, if we don't fix ourselves internally, if we stay this divided, we won't remain the world's reserve currency. And that changes everything. Diamond is clear. Without military and economic preeminence, America loses its edge. And that edge depends on unity and functionality at home. The solution to this is a clear, actionable one. Make the government transparent and accountable. Streamline permitting. Modernize education. Reform healthcare. I'm not saying we need miracles, just basic competence and courage. For everyday Americans, this is where the rubber meets the road. Because the enemy within affects your paycheck, your healthcare, your kids' school, and the stability of your retirement. The message is, if we don't come together fast, we may lose more than just growth. We might lose the very things that make America, America.
But the most important is maintain those military alliances, spend whatever you got to spend to have the strongest military in the world, and I think I'm hoping the goal of the Trump administration is this: keep the Western military alliances together. If the world cannot rely on America's military umbrella, we may have paid too much, we have not done it. If the world can't rely on it, they are going to be looking for alternatives. There's only one other real alternative out there, or getting a nuclear weapon.
Jamie Dimon doesn't just worry about spreadsheets or stock tickers. He worries about geopolitics and how shifting global alliances could reshape the entire economic order. He puts it plainly: America's military and economic leadership are the twin pillars holding up the world's stability. If either falters, we're not just facing recession, we're risking a realignment that could echo through generations. Dimon sees it clearly. Wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, terrorist proxies rising, a newly assertive China preparing for confrontation, North Korea, even whispers of nuclear proliferation. These aren't headlines, they're fault lines. And America? We're stretched thin. Financially, politically, diplomatically. That's why he warns. If our military credibility erodes, the US dollar's dominance as the global reserve currency will follow. That's why he said,
if we are not the preeminent military and the preeminent economy in 40 years, we will not be the reserve currency.
It's a controversial claim, but historically accurate. The world's reserve currency is backed by more than economic output. It's backed by trust in power, alliances, and the promise of global order. Lose that, and you lose more than influence. You lose leverage. And Trump, though often a disruptor, seems aligned in key places. His push to strengthen NATO spending, his China trade battles, his emphasis on America First energy and military infrastructure. Whether you love or hate him, Trump understood the stakes. Dimon sees the same game being played, but with higher risks. He's not just focused on diplomacy. He's focused on supply chains, rare earths, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, the economic arteries that could become choke points if rival blocs form. If we don't shore up alliances, solidify defense strategy, and reassert economic leadership, others will fill the vacuum, possibly with values and systems far removed from democracy and open markets. Dimon also calls out a massive blind spot. The US does a terrible job at development finance. China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, is buying influence across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. And it's working. America's strategy? Almost non-existent. That's where he and Trump align again. Dimon slams the bloated, inefficient bureaucracy that stifles action. Trump built his brand on slashing red tape. The point isn't politics, it's urgency. America's systems need to work again, fast. Jamie Dimon gave us a masterclass in economic red flags, the spiraling debt, the broken bureaucracy, the fraying global alliances, the risks to the US dollar, the shaky state of national security. These are symptoms of a deeper disease, and if you're not paying attention, you're the one most at risk. And that brings us back to you. because this isn't just about high-level policy. This is about your retirement, your job, your investments, your future. If the dollar weakens, your buying power slips. If the bond market cracks, your mortgage rate spikes. If inflation resurges, your grocery bill stretches thin. And if global power shifts, your portfolio gets tossed in the turbulence. So, what should you do? Start by staying informed. Read beyond the headlines. Watch what leaders like Diamond, Buffett, and yes, even Trump are doing, not just saying. Look at how markets are pricing risk. Follow trade and military developments as closely as you follow tech stocks. And most critically, stay flexible. The next financial crisis won't look like 2008. It'll be more subtle, more political, and more psychological. Investors who prepare, who hedge, who diversify, who resist the comfort of denial will come out ahead. Buffett has long said that you only find out who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. Well, the tide is pulling back, fast. If America doesn't adapt, the world will. That means inflation, disrupted supply chains, energy insecurity, and more volatile markets. For investors, it means exposure to rising geopolitical risks and a loss of confidence in U.S. assets. Buffett's quiet caution, Trump's bold confrontations, and Diamond's relentless warnings all lead to the same conclusion. The world's chessboard is being reset, and if America doesn't play to win, we might not even be invited to the next game. Could all this be Trump's power play for a planned crash? To make the Fed do what he wants? Click the video on screen to find out.